My name is Jomo Tariku. I'm an industrial designer. I specifically focus on creating African-inspired furniture design, and I complement what Candy just said about why I got into this and the reason why I'm focused on the African side. And hopefully I'll have the slide going. I've been doing this for 30 years. My career has definitely started going in the right direction and being represented for the first time by a gallery, and my work is being shown at Design Miami. 30 years journey is not easy. I've walked away from it definitely once. But I was lucky enough to get into data, and I've been using that data knowledge also to show the rest of the design world where blacks were not represented. Of course, having a furniture background, my focus has been to make sure that side of the industry definitely looks into hiring and licensing furniture designers that are black or from the diaspora. If the slide is okay. Okay, I can keep talking until, all right, sure. The biggest reason I would say why my career started going well was a few years ago I was approached by Melanie Barnett, the founder of the Black Artists and Designers Guild, about starting a guild for us and to shake up the industry. Until then, it's been an extremely slow progress for me, and I took up that opportunity to join the guild, started work a lot behind the scene, and that push to change the industry is what got me here. So I would encourage any artists, creatives, always make sure you work with each other, you collaborate, and you lift each other up. We artists, unfortunately, tend to be all about us. I think we need to knock that off and always be about raising the tide together. If it's ready, I can go. And I'll try to go through the slides quickly because there's definitely time constraint. If you could go to the next one. This is just a timeline to say the first opportunity I got to restart my career was when another publisher from Zimbabwe actually reached out to me about publishing my work. So this is when I started I quit at 2008, 2015.
We're trying to do that. We're having a problem with it doing it. It's not cooperating.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, great. All right. Then I showed my work in Ethiopia, then to Dubai. If you can go to the next slide, please. This is just a list of shows. Next slide, please. This was the first group of people that got together to start a Black Artists and Designers Guild. And that's when I met most of them for the first time. Next slide, please. And the reason why we started that was this specific event that had about 100 designers and moderators, where not even one black designer was invited. And the title, as you can see, of the event is called What's New, What's Next, and we're not involved. Next slide, please. This specific quote speaks to me every day. And this was said by Professor Ramon Tejada, who's a professor at RISD. And if you don't mind, I would like to quickly read it for you. As a designer, I have come to the terms with the fact that what and who we design, history has been interested in canonizing up to this point does not reflect me, my cultures, my values, and many of the tenets that make me a citizen, a designer, and a teacher. I don't see myself reflected in much of the narrative of design, not in the history, the theory, the practice, or the outcomes. I find this to be a very powerful statement, and this is why I use data to illustrate this point. If you can go to the next slide, please. So I prepared a set of data when I was invited to speak at Princeton University under the title Black Design History, Theory, and Practice. Next. In a specific book, and this goes back to canon, where we end up being missing. The Atlas of Furniture Design, if any of you have seen it, is a very thick book produced by Vitra Museum. This is where things are cataloged, where the contribution of designers are listed. And every white dot you see are non-black people. There are only, I think, 3 of us in there. And there is a specific style that they picked for 3 of us. And that's the other thing I need to demystify. Our work, it has extreme diversity. It's not always animal patterns or animal prints. And it is a wide gamut. And that includes those 2 I talked about, including upcycling. So there is a mentality, especially coming from institutions, that those are the 2 types of things we can do. Next slide, please. And this is the last page on that same book that lists about 80-something design movements and styles. Afrofuturism is not even mentioned in here. There's nothing about black people listed here. Next slide, please. This is the data that I actually collected myself. It's about 150 furniture manufacturers that license from designers to do their work. And out of these 150 plus, and as you can see, I have 2 columns, hopefully it's clear. Left column is the total designers that they use to produce their work, and the right column is the black designers that they have. And this data did get me on the map after the murder of George Floyd, and this data was mentioned on the New York Times, Architectural Digest, and other publications. But this was in the hopes that to encourage that these manufacturers to look into black designers as one of them. I'm happy to say there is 2 members of HBF that actually reached out to me here. It's a furniture company out of North Carolina who will be licensing work for me for the first time. So that is the type of transition I would like to see. Next slide, please. And this is just to demonstrate that, just to save time. This was the first report that was written. We can go to the next slide. Since joining Black Artists and Designers Guild, all these magazines and plus more have covered my work and my progress. And this would have never happened prior to that. Next slide, please. Again, just to indicate, I was hired by World Bank after closing my business in 2008. And I just left a year ago to pursue my furniture design dream. But while at World Bank, what I did was I ended up being a data scientist and my focus on data. So I do both design and data at the same time. Next slide, please. We can go to the next one, next one, and next one. I want to go to this already talked about, next one, until we get to so all my work is about past and present of my heritage. I use those as my design launch pad and to get into what I call my own interpretation of what African design is. I use everything and anything from Africa to be the basis of my design, and that includes wildlife, landscape, your food, your color, your hairstyle, and everything in between. Next slide, please. So, and even though I'm from Ethiopia, and I tend to be a bit biased towards my own culture because I grew up with it, I do look into everybody's culture. Any objects that interest me can become a subject. Next slide. So these would be this would be just samples of seatings that I can use as an inspiration. Next slide. And like I mentioned about inspiration, it could be anything. Like everything you see here, architecture, your colors, your landscapes, and scarification, and so on. Next slide. I tend to do now thumbnail sketches because when going to my day job, I would be on the metro, and the easiest thing to do is do thumbnail sketches. Next slide. So this is just to demonstrate one of the shares that I did last year for the Met. That is based on the Afro hair pick. We really don't have time to dig into it, but if anybody has access to this wonderful book called 6,000 Years of African Combs, I think is a good reference point. Next slide, please. And this is just to show you a progression of how things go. A simple sketch with the person represented going through progression of what could be. And this is what the Met ended up acquiring. I don't have the time to dig into how the construction method was applied, but that could be another fascinating subject. Let's go to the next slide. These are the molds used, so just a quick overlay, but each pick had to be bent separately and combined together before it's shaped to what you just saw. Next slide. Again, going back to inspiration, this is an inspiration from Ethiopia. It's called the Makwamia. And I always name my items after the things that have inspired me. I'm not gonna run from it. I'm not gonna tell you I discovered it, I did it. Most designers are inspired by something. There's rarely anything new we're creating. So giving respect towards what that has inspired us, is a must for me. So this is just one of them. Let's go to the next slide. Same thing here. And I can dive into the whole carrying water, how far women walk. That's another totally different topic, but again, an inspiration to one of my pieces. Next slide. The Nyala chair, which is being shown, designed in Miami, and is actually in the Black Panther movie, but you can barely see it because somebody's sitting on it. Next slide. This is what it looks like from the backside, different versions of it. Let's go ahead. Ashanti stool, there's one sitting in the back, but this is my interpretation of an Ashanti stool to the right. And again, is named after it. It's height adjustable, so you can move it to another notch. Next slide. This is just a 3D model, based on what we call Bertruma in Ethiopia. Next slide. So this was inspired by a birthing chair, and the new version of this chair is actually sitting also at Design Miami. Next slide. This was a shot. We also did another representation of the same chair. Next slide. Another one, which is only 3D. This is my latest work that it is based on, and the new version this is based on is also sitting at Design Miami. Next slide. And this is a 3D model of that idea. Next slide. This is based on a Zulu hut. Again, just reinterpreting those patterns that you see right into the stool. Next slide. Same spin-off of the same idea. Next slide. Same thing, what we call a mukaja. This is also shown, and this is also Wakanda Forever. Next slide. Let's move to the next slide. This is based on the church drums in Ethiopia. Similar idea, being inspired. This is while it's being fabricated. Next slide. This one is based on a headrest. And the way I approach design sometimes is looking at the silhouette of a shape, then focusing on the details and the carvings. Next slide. And for fabrication, just to mention this, the seat initially was wider than this, but to save the amount of material we're using, I'm cutting the parts I need. This is made out of plywood from the interior of this design. Which you can see here in the CAD. Next slide. Similar here, this is laid out on a sheet. Let's go to the next slide. And next one. This shows you what the inner working of that is. Let's go to the next. And this is me working in my tiny shop, fabricating the stools that were about to get shipped to Marvel. There's enough of them done here. And I used to do this at night because I had a day job. So I was managing both. And if you've worked with movies, they have crazy schedules, and this is me trying to get it done quickly. I won't play the video because we don't have time. Let's go. Keep going. Definitely you can find my work on my website. I do have a shopping cart, a MoMA. After that data was published, reached out to me. We had a discussion, and they decided to carry 3 of my work. So MoMA Design Store carries these. Next slide. These are the 3 that are being shown at Design Miami, including this chair. Next slide. These are just studio shots. If we have time, maybe we'll come back and play this video because this kind of demonstrates how I think and design my work. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, here you go. This was, it's all right. I don't want to take up, because I've taken up enough time. This is a show in Paris I was just involved in. Next slide. Okay, this is a quick demonstration where the pieces are. They're really hard to identify, of course. I'm focused on it, but you can see it is back down there. But if you watch the movie and you watch out for the flooding sequence, and if you watch out for that dome, you'll keep seeing them in the background. And those 3 stools are there, and they got 12 copies of those, so they have them everywhere. Next slide. This is in the last scene, but as you can see, one of the actresses is sitting on it, and you can barely see that one, but that's the set design right there. Next slide. I think I should stop here. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Wow, wasn't that powerful?